Now then lads, welcome back. Today I'm going to go back to my roots, sort of, and look at the once new Japanese Tier 4 tank, the Cheeto. For those of you who don't know or don't care about Japan, the Cheeto was added in the Reserve update and bumped the Chunu and NATO down to Tier 3 and became the main Tier 4 tank for Japan. And let me tell you something, this is one hell of an upgrade. Also, if you have any suggestions of guns, tanks, or other things in Enlisted for me to try out and do a similar video on, leave a comment, and I might just get around to it. But first, let's concentrate on the Cheeto, and let's dive in to its history. Japan, 1943. The war isn't going the best for the Imperial Army and their tanks. Most of the designs that are being fielded are Chihas and Hagos, and the Americans have now started using this new tank called the Sherman, except this one has a much bigger gun, really thick armour, and has started popping up everywhere, including China. So, Japan needs a solution. A new tank is needed with the specifications of 75mm of frontal armour and a 75mm gun. It is to be the envy of the US and the Sherman's kryptonite, wiping it off the rightful lands of the rising sun, and pushing the American hordes back to Washington crying and peeing their pants. Oh yes, Japan thinks, as it draws out its design. A masterpiece, a great design of not just warfare, but a tank to represent the will of Japan itself. Anyway, then it has a problem. The US started dropping bombs on Japan, and now the already stretched thin Japanese industry is being stretched thinner. So the Navy now gets more priority, which means the great tank of Japan's dream gets curb-stomped, and all they can afford to build it is the Chinu as a stopgap, which is barely capable of killing the early Sherman variants. Drat, Mitsubishi says, as it realises that it now has to produce the kind of crappier tank instead, but it doesn't stop them, and they end up going to the Japanese High Command and say that they will have 25 of the new Cheetos built each month in 1944, they claim, and end up only producing a prototype and a pre-production model before the power of the sun is unleashed and Hiroshima and Nagasaki become concrete fields. So, no designs get used in combat, and what is left is dumped in a lake. But what was this design that was so good it had to be destroyed to stop the Americans finding out its secret? Japan's really botched attempt at a Panzer IV is pretty much what it was. I mean, look at it, the damn turret's off-center, and it still doesn't have a coaxial machine gun. So, overall, the story of the Cheeto is to never try and make a tank which you know you can't make. Or something, I don't know, there's probably a moral with this story, but I can't think of one. So, getting back to the Cheeto and Enlisted, I'll split it down into three categories: gun, armour, and mobility, to kind of get across how good each one is and how good the tank is overall. So, let's begin with the guns. The main gun of the Cheeto is the 75mm Type 2 Model 2 cannon, which is actually pretty good. It can pen all the American tanks, including the Pershing if you employ a little bit of flanking, and is frankly, in my opinion, the best gun on a Japanese tank, because at least you still have a turret with it, unlike the Honey. You also have the choice between AP, HE, and HE, and both of these rounds are actually quite good, including the HE, which I found performs similarly to the late Panzer IVs and the Panthers HE. So you've got pretty decent anti-infantry capabilities as well. You have just under 30 rounds of each, and that's a fair amount. You just need to remember to not go mad with the HE. For the AP-HE, it's actually pretty decent. You've got a fair amount of pen, and like I say, you can indeed go ahead and kill the Pershing and even the Jumbos if you know where you're aiming. So this thing's actually pretty decent. Overall, the cannon performs fairly well and does feel like a much-needed upgrade to the Chinu, which, at least in my opinion, makes it feel much better, and the first competent Japanese tank that has a gun that can deal with pretty much all the Shermans reliably. You also get two Type 97 machine guns as well, one in the hull and one in the turret. These are both nice and play like the machine guns on the Chinu and other Japanese tanks of the same caliber like the Hoei, and it's nice to have the option to use them. Not that you'll use them a huge amount, but it's still useful. So overall, the armaments and the gun on the Cheeto are fairly good, and honestly make this tank feel like a normal tank, which is wild for a Japanese tank to actually feel normal and contemporary. As for the armour, you're still not getting a whole lot here. Mostly similar to late Panzer IVs, which is kind of a shame, but the 75mm front plate is nice, even if it would be ineffective at Tier 4 tanks against, the larger Shermans. You also have side armour, kind of 50mm, which isn't brilliant, and finally your sides on your hull at least are 35mm, which is kind of crap. This all comes together to make a kind of Japanese glass cannon with glass machine guns. The armour on the turret as well is mainly 75mm on the front with 50 on the sides, which isn't all that bad, but it's not brilliant either. The armour does allow you to be one-shot by most of the later American tanks, especially those with the 76mm M1 long barrel and above, because if they know what they're doing, it's not entirely hard to kill you. And you will have to get the first shot in or flank off on Jumbos or Pershings especially. But overall, the armour is nothing new compared to the Japanese tanks before it, which have similar problems. The numbers have just gone up a little bit. So really, you should be playing and hiding and sort of flanking with this mainly due to its weak armour. So kind of, you want to play this similarly to how you'd play the Chinu, really. As for mobility, it's actually quite good. You have a more powerful engine when you've fully upgraded it, with a little extra top speed over the Chinu, but the extra power is the kind of more important thing here, since it makes it easier to get over certain obstacles, which is actually pretty helpful, especially if you're going cross-country. You have fairly clear visibility as well, with a full cupola, like most of the later Japanese tanks, and your sights are not going to be blocked if you decide to drive up a hill, like some tanks. Cough, catchy, cough. Overall, you have a fairly well-rounded and powerful tank, and driving this feels similar to tanks like the Panzer IV, if a little bit longer. But overall, it's a pretty good engine, and you've got a pretty standard, if not a little bit above standard, engine. So yeah, it's not bad. I like it. Overall, the Cheeto is pretty good, and it finally gives Japan a competent tank with a turret and cannon to boot. In fact, I'd argue this thing is kind of livable alongside of the Honey. I mean, that's how I used it. It feels a bit more dangerous to use, but at the same time, it has a lot more to offer, including both the machine guns and a turret. Therefore, the Cheeto is more of an upgrade to the Chi-Nu, but it is an upgrade that is worth considering, and hell, like I said, you may prefer this over the Honey if you don't like fixed turret structures. And overall, this thing could deal with just about the same threats as the Honey, so it's actually pretty decent. Therefore, with that said, I do hope to see more of these in the battlefield, making Pershing suffer even more. Anyway, with that, thank you for listening to my rambles. If you have any equipment you'd like to see me have a look at, leave some in the comments and I might get around to it. And goodbye.